There is a detail about Roman crucifixion that almost no film has ever shown you, honestly. And once you know it, you will never read the Gospels the same way again. When Rome crucified a man, they did not build the cross out on some quiet hillside where only a few would see. They built it beside the road, the main road, the one leading in and out of the city gates where merchants passed with their carts and children walked to market and travelers could not look away even if they wanted to. And they left the body up there, not for an hour, sometimes for days, until the birds had done what the executioners no longer needed to do. This was not incidental cruelty. It was the entire point. Rome did not crucify to kill a man quickly. Rome crucified to make every single person who walked that road ask themselves a question: do I want to end up like that? I want you to hold that image for a moment. The cross standing beside a public road, because it is the exact picture standing behind the question so many of you carry quietly and never quite say out loud. Why did they do it that way? Why the cross specifically? Why not something faster, something more merciful, something that did not leave a man hanging exposed for the whole world to see? Was it random cruelty? Or was there a reason buried underneath centuries of church art and Easter services that softened the picture until we forgot what we were actually looking at? I promise you there is an answer, and it was not settled by a theologian in a quiet study somewhere. It was settled by the very people who watched it happen, who stood at the foot of that hill and had to decide right then whether what they saw was defeat or something else entirely. Stay with me all the way to the end tonight, because this one changes how you see the whole story. Let me start honestly, the way I would want someone honest with me. Nowhere in Scripture does God sit down and explain, in a single tidy verse, exactly why the cross was the method chosen above every other. That full answer is not written out in one place. It comes together the way a mosaic comes together, piece laid beside piece, until the picture is unmistakable. And if any preacher tells you it's all sitting in one verse, be careful with the rest of what that man tells you too, because he is filling in gaps Scripture left for us to piece together with the whole of the Word, not with one line of it. So let's start where the weight of this really begins, far earlier than Rome, in a law given long before a single Roman soldier ever raised a hammer. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 23. His body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt in any wise bury him that day, for he that is hanged is accursed of God. Sit with that word, accursed. In the law given to Moses, centuries before Rome existed as an empire, hanging a body on a tree or a wooden post was already understood as a mark, a visible sign that this person stood outside the blessing of God under judgment, set apart in shame. This was not a Roman idea borrowed later. This was ancient, woven into Israel's law from the beginning. And here is where the whole picture turns, because when the gospel writers describe Jesus on the cross, and when Paul later writes about it to the churches, they are not ignorant of that verse. They are staring directly at it and doing something almost unbearable with it. Now, most believers have heard the word crucifixion their whole lives and pictured it the way it's painted in stained glass, a serene man, arms outstretched, expression peaceful, almost floating above the suffering. And I understand why the art softened it. Grief needs beauty sometimes to be bearable. But that image has quietly trained generations to miss what the earliest witnesses could never have missed. Crucifixion, as Rome practiced it, was designed around total public humiliation, not simply pain. Victims were typically stripped, sometimes completely, and displayed at a height where the whole crowd could see everything. Roman writers of the period described crucifixion as a punishment reserved specifically for slaves, rebels, and enemies of the state, precisely because it was considered too degrading for a Roman citizen to endure, no matter what crime he had committed. Cicero himself, writing decades before Christ, called it the most cruel and disgusting of punishments. and said the very word for it should be kept far from the ears, eyes, and thoughts of Roman citizens. That is how shameful this method was understood to be, even by the people who used it every day. Now let me give you something most churchgoers have never once been told, sitting in a pew their whole lives. Archaeologists working outside Jerusalem in the 20th century uncovered the heel bone of a crucified man from the 1st century, a man named Jehohanan, still pierced through by an iron nail, the wood of the cross, still fused to the bone after 2,000 years. It is the only direct physical evidence of a crucifixion from that exact era and region ever found. And it confirmed something historians had debated for generations, that the positioning, the placement of the nails, the mechanics of it were even more brutal and more deliberately public than earlier assumed. This was not stylized suffering. This was engineered, methodical, state-sanctioned terror, built to be watched. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. Above the head of a crucified man, Rome would often nail a small sign, a titulus, stating the crime, written in the language of the crowd, so that no one passing on that road could mistake the message. For Jesus, that sign read Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, so that every traveler, whatever tongue they spoke, could read it. Rome intended it as mockery, a political joke nailed above a dying man, proof of what happens to anyone who dares to claim a throne that belongs to Caesar. They meant it to humiliate him one final time before he died. They had no idea they were writing the truest sign that would ever hang over a human life. Now here is where I need to gently take something away from many of you, because it may be sitting underneath your discomfort with this whole subject without you even realizing where it came from. Some of you were taught, maybe not in words but in tone, that the cross is something to move past quickly, to soften, to hurry through on the way to Easter morning, because dwelling on the brutality of it feels somehow disrespectful or morbid. That instinct did not come from Scripture. It came from centuries of art and tradition, trying to make an unbearable image bearable for a congregation. The earliest Christians did not have that luxury. They lived surrounded by actual crosses, real ones, still standing beside real roads, and they refused to look away from what their Lord endured on one. That fear of looking directly at it, that was never commanded in the Bible. It was inherited from later comfort, passed down until it felt like reverence, but it never was reverence. It was avoidance, and avoidance was never what the earliest church practiced. Paul, writing to a church in Philippi that lived every day under Roman authority, under Roman crosses, standing along their own roads, wrote something almost unthinkable for his time. He humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Wherefore God also hath highly exalted him, and given him a name which is above every name. Read that sequence slowly. The lowest point Rome could engineer, the most degrading death Cicero said should not even be spoken of among decent people, and Paul places it directly beside the highest exaltation in the universe, with no space between them at all. Not despite the cross, through it. And Jesus himself, before it ever happened, said something that only makes sense once you understand exactly how shameful that death was meant to be. And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. Lifted up, the very phrase Rome used to describe hoisting a condemned criminal into public view for maximum shame, Jesus takes and turns completely over, using it instead to describe the moment of his greatest drawing power, his greatest glory. Picture a farmer holding a small, hard, unremarkable seed, the kind you could crush between two fingers without a second thought. He places it into the ground, into the dark, into what looks for all the world like a burial, and by every visible measure that seed is finished, gone, absorbed into the dirt with nothing left to show for it. And yet that is exactly the moment the harvest begins. Paul describes resurrection with that very image, sown in weakness, raised in power, sown in dishonor, raised in glory. That is not only a picture of what happens to a believer's body after death, it is the picture standing directly behind the cross itself. The most dishonoring death Rome could design became, in the hands of God, the exact seed from which resurrection and salvation and the drawing of every nation to himself would grow. So let me gather all of this into your hands, the way I promised I would. Rome crucified beside the road specifically to shame and to warn. And that shame is not something Scripture hides from you or asks you to look away from. The law in Deuteronomy already marked hanging on a tree as an accursed sign long before Rome existed, and Christ walked directly into that curse rather than around it. The titulus meant as mockery became the truest confession Rome ever accidentally wrote. And the very word Jesus used for his own crucifixion, lifted up, is the same word turned completely inside out, from ultimate humiliation into ultimate glory. The cross was never a design flaw in the story, some tragic accident God was forced to work around. It was the chosen ground, the seed sown in the one soil low enough and shameful enough to grow a harvest that could reach every nation on earth. So here is your answer, plainly the way I promised you tonight. I believe the cross was not simply the method of his death, but the very message itself dishonor absorbed on purpose, so that dishonor would never again have the final word over anyone who belongs to him. What you do with that is between you and him, and I am not here to hand you a formula. Only the truth as Scripture lays it out. If you have ever felt too marked by shame, too far gone, too accursed by your own history to belong anywhere near God, hear this clearly tonight. He walked directly into the very symbol of curse and shame and let it be nailed to himself instead of to you. Whatever hallway you're standing in tonight, whatever diagnosis, whatever guilt, whatever quiet shame you have never said out loud to another living soul, the God you are asking about already went to the lowest, most humiliated place a human being could be placed, and he walked out of it 3 days later with the grave doors torn open behind him. That is not a story that ends in shame. It ends in a name above every name, and a road, once meant only for death, now leading somewhere else entirely. If tonight opened something in you, or gave you a piece of this story you had never been shown before, do me one small kindness. Press that like button and subscribe to this channel, so these words can find their way to someone else standing on their own road tonight, who needs to see what was really hanging over their head all along. God bless you, and may his peace keep your heart all the way home. I'll see you next time.